or I got my shit together and I got into medical school, and I got my law degree and I got my medical degree, and then they just go on. And for me, it's like, well, hold on. There's a huge jump between I wasn't very well at school and then I got into law school. Hello boys, how are we? Now, excuse the stupid title of this video. I wanted to call it something silly because that's what gets clicks on YouTube, so I thought it was worth a go. But this is something that is important and something that I've wanted to talk about and touch on for a little while, but just haven't really got round to. But listening to something this weekend sort of brought me back to it, and yeah, that was basically what inspired me to make this video. So, as a lot of you guys know, I listen to loads and loads of podcasts and interviews with sort of very successful people, or authors, or athletes, or business people, or things like that. I know I mentioned Diary of a CEO quite a lot, Game Changing Attorney podcast, loads of things like that, which, just on a side tangent, is something I definitely recommend doing. I'll move on to it a little bit later in terms of why I find it so useful. But yeah, if that's not something you do, something that I'd definitely recommend doing. But what sort of strikes me with a lot of these things is how they talk about how they struggled maybe in childhood, but they specifically relate it to education. A lot of them talk about how they didn't do very well at school, or they didn't get on well at school, or they messed around at school, which is I can imagine that's very true. A lot of people that are sort of very entrepreneurial don't always fit into sort of mainstream society, as you say, or things like that. But the bit that sort of stuck with me and that I wanted to talk about today is, and it came up because I was listening to an interview with Robert Greene over the weekend, who wrote 48 Laws of Power and books like that, really good books. But he said something, and it's something that a lot of them say that sort of just seems to go over people's heads that I think doesn't really get addressed enough. And it's this thing of, a lot of them will say things like, yep, I really didn't behave at school, I didn't get on well at school, blah blah blah, and then they'll go, but then I got my shit together and I got into law school. Or yeah, I got my shit together and I got an internship at JP Morgan, or I got my shit together and I got into medical school, and I got my law degree and I got my medical degree, and then they just go on. And for me, it's like, well, hold on. There's a huge jump between I wasn't very well at school and then I got into law school, or I messed around a little bit, but then I got an internship at JP Morgan, or something like that. And it's something that the interviewer never really seems to pull people up on. They just sort of go, oh, that's good, you got your stuff together, well done. And I think that immediately cuts out and immediately alienates loads and loads of people who, that's not their skill set. A lot of athletes are very similar, as I mentioned, that they'll sort of go, yeah, I wasn't really pushing myself in school when I was younger, and then yeah, one day I got tired of it and I decided to start running marathons, or decided to start running triathlons. And it's like, hold on, that's a huge, that's not something that just anyone can do. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is I think that's a part of people's stories that ends up losing a lot of people, because a lot of people listen to that, and I'll go on to sort of how this affects me in a minute. A lot of people listen to that and go, well, that's not really inspiring for me, because I can't do that. And for me, this really resonated because yes, I'm at university now, but I really was bad at school. Academics and education really weren't my thing. I'm awful in exams. I didn't write particularly well. I've got a little bit better at essays now, but I really was terrible at school. So for me, I could have worked as hard as I liked. I could have got as many tutors as I wanted. I would never ever be able to go to law school or be able to go to medical school. That's not how my brain's wired. It's not sort of It's not an excuse. It's not anything. That's just I fundamentally am not good enough at reading, exams, and academics to go and do something like that. Likewise, with the way my heart's built, I could never run a marathon. I just couldn't. My heart would not be able to keep up that intensity for 26.5 miles or 26.2 miles. It just wouldn't happen. I could maybe walk a marathon over a few days, but I would never be able to go and run a marathon, run a triathlon, do an Ironman or anything like that. No matter how hard I train, no matter how long I put into it, if I put my life and soul into it for a year, I could maybe get round a 10k or maybe a half marathon very slowly. But my heart would, like, for me, with especially I'm quite a short guy, so for me to run a marathon, we're talking 5-6 probably longer hours. My heart would not be able to stay at that intensity for that long. It would just collapse in on itself, and that's why I sort of wanted to. That's why I named the video something silly like I did, because I wanted to talk about how you can be successful when it feels like you just can't do anything. Now, like I said, obviously I'm being silly. The title of the video is a bit silly. It's not that I can't do anything. I obviously do have some skill, some talent, some value that I can bring, but they may just not be what's considered mainstream. So I'm going to do a quick bedroom tidy, which I'll put on time lapses. That was the word I was looking for. And then, yeah, I'll get back to this afterwards. So, how do we counteract this lack of ability to do anything or pass exams or do anything like that? So, simple, talked about it a million times. You have to identify your strengths. You have to find out what you are good at. Like I said, when I was younger, I did dream of, I got maybe not so much lawyer, but I wanted to be a lawyer for a little bit. I really wanted to work in finance for a little bit. I sort of, as most guys did, watched Wolf of Wall Street, and it changed my life. I watched things like Billions and stuff like that. I was lucky because I was born with the heart condition I've got. Professional athlete was off the cards from day one. Obviously, if I didn't have my heart problem, I would be one. But yeah, that sort of wasn't so much of a big deal for me. But I know that I wanted to talk about it because that is something that other people have. But the reality was, after working in sort of financy kind of jobs, and I worked in a lot of sales jobs, they weren't my strengths. They clearly weren't my strengths. As much as I wanted them to be, and as much as I wanted to be Jordan Belfort and be a millionaire by 25 or something like that, those just weren't my strengths. One of my closest mates that I worked with, he's absolutely unbelievable at it. He's got his own business already and does really well with it. The cream always rises to the top. That's just the reality. If you're in a job and you've been doing it for years and you actually try and you're not getting any better at it, if you want to stick around with it and if your finances allow, then sure, if you enjoy it and you're happy. But the reality is, if you're trying something for years and years and years and you're not doing very well at it, it's probably just not one of you. You're probably just not playing to what your strengths are. My strengths are communicating, interpersonal relations, empathy, dealing with people and things like that. Which is why, after sitting down and actually doing some thinking, I'm at university studying psychology, trained to be a therapist, because that makes far more sense than me trying to smash my head against the wall doing a sales job, or being miserable trying to get a law degree, or studying accounting and finance and turning up to an investment bank and being bottom of the pile every day. Because that's what would have happened if I had tried to pursue those routes. I probably would have ended up just being unemployed because I wouldn't have lasted in any of those jobs. On the athletic side of things, obviously, again, it's not something I can speak to from experience, but looking at you guys who are, again, that's slightly different, because you can obviously physically enhance your body a lot more than in ways you can physically enhance your brain if that's wired certain ways. But at the same, you do also have to be realistic with that side of things as well. If you're maybe getting on, it sounds silly because it's not old at all, but if you are maybe sort of getting on to your mid to late 20s, certainly late 20s, but even if you're in your mid 20s and you're cracking away at being a professional athlete and you're still not quite getting there, the reality is that your physicality might just not allow you to get that far. All jokes aside, if I didn't have my heart problem, even with my size and height, maybe a tennis player, if I'd have dedicated my entire life to it. But realistically, I wouldn't have been a professional athlete no matter how hard I tried. That's just not how I'm built. I wouldn't have the genetics for it. My brother won the genetic lottery, not me. I got the other side of things. He probably could have been a professional rugby player if he'd really wanted to be, but that's just not how I'm built. So if I didn't have my heart condition, I wanted to go down that route, I probably would have got to my late teenage years and people would have gone, look, you haven't really grown, you're not really sort of strong enough, you're not fit enough, that's not going to be an option for you either. And that's fine, because that's not my strength. So yeah, overcoming this, counteracting this, you're working out your strengths, sit down, have a real good think, talk to people close to you, talk to your teachers if you're still in school. These are good people who know you well. They will be honest with what you're best at. You double down on those strengths. What is the point in spending all your time trying to brush up on your weaknesses when you can just double down your strengths and become even better at them? If you've got a natural God-given talent in a certain area, why would you spend your time trying to do other things? Pursue on that. And final thing on limitations. We've discussed that quite a lot in this video. My limitations were my reading's not great, my maths is decent but not amazing. Physically, I've got no chance of doing anything even remotely competent. But that doesn't mean you can't push those limits. If you are really keen on doing something in sport or in a certain area, and maybe you're very lucky and you've got parents who say, whatever you want to do, financially we will support you forever, then cool. Still push that. Even if you don't have that, you can still push those limits. I will still always push the limits of my physicality, probably a bit too much. There have been a few times where I've got involved in a couple of exercises, and we were doing tackling the other day. I probably shouldn't be doing that, but I want to push my limits. I want to see how far I can go. No, I'll never be able to run marathons, but does that mean I should never run at all? I ended up getting reasonably decent time. For someone with very short legs, I ended up getting reasonably decent times when I started doing those 5Ks a couple of years ago, and I just stopped doing it. There was no reason for that. There was no medical reason at all that I needed to stop doing that. That was just me effectively being lazy. So that's why I've started to add a little bit more running and a little bit more cardio in now. Just because you have those limits doesn't mean you can't push your body to those limits and see if you could maybe even push those limits out a little bit further. And just to finish up, on the academic side of things, if that is the route you want to go and you are genuinely worried that you're at school and you get terrible grades and maybe you're dyslexic or dyspraxic, and no matter how hard you try, you're just not getting the grades, there are so many forms of education, there are so many routes you can go down now. If you go to a school that says you have to do A-levels, university, or you're a failure, leave that school. Get out, find a careers advisor, anything. There are apprenticeships, there are internships, there are diplomas and things like that. There are colleges, there are things that you can do later. If you're I didn't go to uni till I was 24. I know it's not exceptionally old, but it is 6 years after most people go to university. You might be in your 40s. There are things you can do. There are things you can do later in life. If university is what you've got your heart set on, there are foundation years at small. That's what I did. I had to find a small university and do a foundation year because my A-levels were so bad. I would never have got in anywhere decent. That's just, if that's what you want to do, that's what you've got to do. But don't ever be deterred. I personally think it is criminal the way that the school system tells you that if you don't do well in your GCSEs, then you'll fail at life. Like I said, my closest mate, I don't think he turned up to most of his GCSE exams. He is earning more money now than I will probably ever earn in my life, because he had a skill set that he just doubled down on. He didn't need exams to tell him he was a brilliant salesperson. That was just what he wanted to do. He was very good at it and he stuck with it. So yeah, don't be deterred. Look at your strengths, double down on them and push your limits. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. I do appreciate you guys who stick around. If you did find any use in this, please do consider subscribing. Don't forget to like the video, comment any other advice you have below, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, take care lads.